We're live? All right, cool. So welcome everyone, thank you for coming. This is the STL Angular Meetup. This is the reboot. And so I don't think anyone here has met me yet. I'm Paul Spears. I work at Oasis Digital. And Josh Godai used to run this meetup, but he's now living out in the valley, so he will not be running the meetup anymore. I don't think he could stomach that commute. So he reached out to us. We knew him through working together on Angular Bootcamp. So he reached out to us and said, I think you guys do a great job. Let me hook you up to kind of take over and lead things out from there. And so here we are. So thank you for coming. I know we got some folks online. And then tonight we're doing obviously a panel. And I'll let you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves. Start here.
My name is Corey Ryland. I'm a developer on the Clarity UI team at VMware. I actually live here locally in St. Louis. I'm also a Google developer expert for Angular, and I help with the Angular Bootcamp classes.
Corey Ryland, I didn't know you were over there.
Should we have Bonnie be between you two?
Corey!
Yeah. Oh, okay. Have Bonnie be between you two, because that's where she is in order.
Okay.
Go, Bonnie.
Floor is yours, Bonnie. And
Hello, I'm Bonnie. I'm from Texas. I run NG Houston, and we have a YouTube channel as well. And I'm also a panelist on Angular Air every week, and I'm an Angular GDE. And that's my clock.
Awesome, thank you.
So, hello everybody, my name is Jack Balbus. I am a developer at Oasis Digital along with Paul and Kyle, and I'm also an instructor with Angular Bootcamp.
Hey, I'm Kyle Cordes. As has been mentioned, I'm yet another developer and also, in fact, a founder at Oasis Digital, where we teach Angular Bootcamp. So we are like super incredibly ridiculously into Angular, so much so that this is one of 2 Angular meetups we sponsor. That's how into Angular we are. So.
All right, awesome. So tonight, again, we're talking about the state of Angular in 2019. And to kick things off, the first question I want to talk about, kind of topic I want to talk about, is actually about Google. So I know obviously no one here is an employee at Google, but through some of the relationships and the connections that we've made there, we've gotten to know quite a few of the developers on the Angular team. And so based on that, like what is your perspective on the continued importance of Angular to Google? And Bonnie, we'll go ahead and start with you since you're kind of the looming presence over the screen here.
I think, yeah, because it was about 2 weeks ago at NG Atlanta. Brad Green was talking about, Angular at Google, and they're using Angular all over Google. It's not the only language that they're using, but they are using it extensively. So it's definitely not going anywhere anytime soon.
Okay. And then whoever here wants to chime in, just pass the mic.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's pretty obviously true. I mean, they've said before that, if the whole rest of the world stopped using Angular, it would still be being worked on by Google. So I don't think that they're planning on changing that anytime soon.
I can add a comment. So we follow, of course, Angular stuff really closely, but we also try to follow the web platform as a whole. And Google's teams loom large over much of the web platform, for obvious reasons, Chrome and so on. And it's interesting that Angular is this huge important thing to Google, but they're actually so big. They have so many bright people working on so many other things that they have other, like not quite competing because they're kind of in different niches, but they have other things that are sort of candidates to be like solving the same kinds of problems. So you can actually adopt multiple different strongly Google-supported technologies across the web platform, depending on the shape of your problem. That's pretty cool.
Great, thanks. All right, so up next, I actually wanted to talk about TypeScript. So let me go ahead and make sure I'm running this thing here. There it is, thank you. All right, so in TypeScript, there seems to be a huge surge of developers that have suddenly decided 2019, this is the year I'm going to learn TypeScript. And so my first question there would be, what do you think is causing that surge? What's leading that? Why would people suddenly pick that up?
Well, my conjecture would be Angular, really. So, prior to Angular version 2, right, it was relatively common to not use anything on top of JavaScript, right? You were developing a web application or something for the web, and you would use just plain JavaScript. And there were things you could do, like TypeScript was around at the time, I believe, and you could like use things like CoffeeScript, but Angular being TypeScript first really, I think, is pushing people to say, oh, well, I don't necessarily like Angular, but I'm trying out Angular and I like TypeScript, and I can use TypeScript really easily with other frameworks, and so maybe I'll pick up TypeScript but not Angular. So people who are trying, Angular are also by default trying out TypeScript, and maybe people are liking TypeScript more than they're liking Angular over time.
I think a big factor over the past year or two has been the tooling around TypeScript has really matured. For library authors, it kind of just makes sense to use TypeScript, especially for the consumers of those libraries. If you use VS Code, even if you're writing in JavaScript, it can consume that type information from the NPM packages. So even if you're using vanilla JavaScript, there's a...
Oh no!
We lost you, Bonnie.
Poor Bonnie.
My head.
We'll be pausing for technical difficulties. So the tooling's matured.
traumatic, you guys.
So even if you use vanilla JavaScript, there's a good chance you might be indirectly using TypeScript in some fashion. So as more and more library authors use TypeScript, it gets easier to use TypeScript as just a consumer building web apps. Because early on in TypeScript, one of the biggest pain points of using it was you would consume a third-party library and it wouldn't have any types, and TypeScript would try to do all this type checking, and you get all this crazy nonsense with types. And I think a lot of that pain has kind of evaporated quite a bit.
When I first started, am I frozen? No, I'm not frozen. When I first started development, TypeScript wasn't out yet, right? And all the cool kids were the back end, the C# and the Java and all that kind of stuff. And JavaScript wasn't really taken too seriously. It was like the Wild West, and you could do all kinds of crazy stuff, and there wasn't any accountability. And then when Node.js and Angular came out, and some of the frameworks started to show up, then we started building bigger and bigger applications, and then all of a sudden we had accountability, and we kind of needed the structure. And so TypeScript, I think, offers that structure, and it's more restrictive, and so it kind of takes a little bit to get used to, but because it's more restrictive, it actually ends up being cleaner and simpler in the long run. And so I think that's why TypeScript is getting more popular, because JavaScript has gone into the more business logic, bigger applications, and that's why I think we needed that structure, like we had with the backend languages.
Awesome, thanks. All right, so,
So I was just curious. I had to stall for time so I could do a quick search. So I have an immense sense of timing. I gave a talk in 2015 that now was the time for TypeScript. And so I think only about 4 years off. I think it's now obvious that I'm 4 years off of being right. Yeah, just the industry adoption and momentum we're seeing now is just fantastic. And I mean, it'd be great for Angular to take credit for that. But I think it's actually spread far beyond Angular. And of course, it started before Angular. But where we've seen the biggest impact is people coming into the JavaScript world. If they're coming from, I think Paul's told me this, like coming from Java or C#, they feel so welcome. And so I think TypeScript has enabled the kind of front-end world to become a lot more welcoming to like the broader community of developers. And that's really fantastic.
So the structure's more intuitive. I tried to teach AngularJS to .NET developers back in like 2013, 2014. They were hostile. They did not like it at all. But then when I came back with TypeScript and it was like that MVC architecture that they were used to, it was a whole lot easier to swallow. Yeah. We were country when country wasn't cool, Kyle.
I think another factor is Microsoft being really involved with open source. I think recently, I don't remember the details, but I believe TypeScript said they'll be working much closer with ESLint.
They're switching.
Yeah, they're switching.
All in on ESLint. Yep.
Yeah, so TypeScript the team working much closer to the JavaScript community as a whole is going to help drive that adoption.
Excellent. And so, what effect, if any, do you think this will have on possibly driving traffic back to Angular? Now that now that TypeScript's no longer going to be necessarily the big hurdle, because when we first taught classes, a lot of students would come in and they'd say, well, maybe Angular, but I don't know about this TypeScript. So do you think this will actually have any effect on that?
What's Bonnie think? I have no idea.
I love TypeScript. I don't know what they're talking about. I really, I mean, it was something that I had to learn, but once I learned it, I really don't want to write plain JavaScript. Once I learned TypeScript, especially once I learned like Angular 2 and beyond, it's much more fun for me to write TypeScript. It's clean. I like clean, I don't like messy code, and the TypeScript is just very regimented and clean, and it's nice. I like it. I like it. Tell them I said it's better.
I think TypeScript, as it gets more adopted, it's going to help people feel more comfortable across all JavaScript frameworks, not just Angular. Because as a whole, the front end's kind of coalescing around common ideas, like static analysis is a good thing, TypeScript is a good thing, component-based architecture is a good thing, and all these frameworks are starting to look more and more similar, and it's coming down to kind of syntax preferences. So it may not drive a ton of traffic to Angular, but everyone's going to feel a little bit more comfortable jumping between frameworks.
Excellent. Out of curiosity, anyone in here not like TypeScript? Because I know about half the room was already using Angular. No one's got any beef with TypeScript. All right, everyone's sold. They're convinced.
So I've got a bit on TypeScript. So you sometimes, it's easy to look at TypeScript and think, oh, look, this is more complex, right? Is this going to be slower? But of course, since it is compile time only and it evaporates completely at runtime, you could argue, oh, it's actually free at runtime. But for the people that are really doing hardcore optimization, trying to get the smallest possible bundle and so on, it turns out that type information makes it possible to produce a smaller running output. So as we move toward mobile apps and like the next billion users on phones that are not the brand new Pixel or whatever, TypeScript is actually very helpful to make smaller, faster loading things. Even so it's not only free, it's like better than free. You actually get a smaller result, even though it's a more powerful tool to input.
Yeah, so to riff off of what both you and Corey said, I think that increasingly, supporting TypeScript or something like it is going to become something like table stakes for any kind of front-end framework. So I don't know that will necessarily drive people back to Angular specifically, but...
Okay. All right, so next up, I want to talk a little bit about Angular and their versioning systems. So
Angular
first
and
thing,
what?
though, is it seems that the team has actually held really good on their promises of, like, hey, we want to provide continuous updates and effectively communicate anytime we have a breaking change. And they really seem to have heard the message when they jumped from AngularJS to Angular, and are really holding true to that. And so do you expect that we'll see more of that in 2019, or are they going to surprise us and shake things up?
So I think it's important to point out that the only reason that there was so much of a shakeup between AngularJS and Angular is because they thought that they had the room to do that, and that they didn't really have that large of a user base outside of Google, or at least that's what they thought. And so I think that they've been sufficiently burned by that they're going to remember that and not repeat the same mistake again. So I don't think that they're going to be, doing anything wild and crazy with their versioning system in the future.
Another thing to keep in mind with Angular and their versioning system, if they decide to break something with Angular, change an API, it's on the Angular team to go around to the hundreds of internal Google apps and go fix all of them. So they're very hesitant to make those changes because they have to go fix everything they just broke. So I think stability is pretty important.
Yeah, so I'm not aware of really any open source sizable thing that's under active development that has such an obvious, is extreme the right word? Like obsessive dedication to Semver and backward compatibility. I mean, if you looked up Semver and backward compatibility in a dictionary, it really should have a picture of the Angular team there as an example. But if you've been kind of following their progress, there's this new Ivy thing coming on the way in. And it's going to enable many kinds of innovation once it's all the way complete. And so although I can't imagine they'll ever ship a thing called Angular that violently breaks compatibility like ever again, I think we're going to start more extreme innovation coming up in the next few years. Not even few years, the next year and a half out of Angular. Ivy's looking pretty good, and I think once it ships, it's going to get interesting.
It's crazy because we've been waiting forever for Ivy, or it seems like we've been waiting forever because we've been so excited about Ivy. But the reason why it's taking so long is because it's going to be completely backward compatible. So you can use Ivy as soon as it comes out without refactoring your code, which I love. And it's just going to, and they're working so hard to make that happen because they could have released it a long time ago, except it would have had breaking changes. And so basically they're having to go back and reverse engineer all this stuff to make sure that you guys don't have to refactor. So I love that. And also the CLI add update that's come out, I think in version 6 is kind of amazing. So that's something that makes it much easier to update going forward. So they have really put a lot of thought into this stuff and come a long way.
Excellent. So we keep our Angular curriculum on a pretty tight leash. Like we keep an eye out on what's going on with Angular, and we keep it up to date with latest version of Angular, update anything that's changed. And for the last 6 months to a year, somewhere in there, that process has kind of gotten pretty automated and almost boring to kind of find out what's new with Angular. And so it kind of feels like that we might be starting to see some slowdown. Like, do you guys see any of that? Or is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What are your thoughts on that?
It's a good thing.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing. I think that there's a lot of change coming, but it's kind of the underlying plumbing that's not going to have breaking changes. That's just going to enable that innovation Kyle mentioned. So it might seem a little slow right now, but it's just the team's trying to kind of prepare things, get things smoothed out so people can build on top of the Angular.
So I just updated, I think, 50 programs, 50 small example programs today to compile on Angular 7.2.2, I think. And I made a few small edits. None of them were breaking changes. They were just because the lint tooling keeps getting better. So to satisfy a picky lint tool, I made minor edits. So that's how stable it is, right? It's like really, really stable. But Paul flashed a slide up. I don't know if it made it on.
We'll come back to that slide too. Yeah,
but I think there's actually been a huge amount of activity in the last couple of years. It's just that most of the visible changes have been across that entire slide instead of in the little box labeled Angular. So I mean, we're seeing a lot of progress on this ecosystem, even though Angular itself is like surprisingly stable.
Yeah, and that was pretty much my next question. I'll go ahead and show that slide. Bonnie, you're just going to have to pretend, but this is a slide from Brad Green's keynote. And so he was up on stage at Angular Mix presenting, talking about Angular and things to come. This was some time ago now. But the slide itself, what's so interesting about this slide is that there are all these icons that represent kind of like the different facets of Angular. And so Angular itself, it has integrations with things like internationalization. It has test tooling built around it for both end-to-end and unit testing. It has support for browser tooling with Augury, progressive web app support. It has the CLI, elements, so on and so forth. So there's all these different integration points. That being said, what do you expect to see this year, like from the point of view on this picture? Like, do we expect to see this picture continue to grow, to take on more integrations, or focus on the stories of what we already have?
It's already outdated. There's no Bazel.
Yeah.
Bazel has an icon. I think Ivy has an icon too.
I think there's a newer version of that slide
already.
on a more recent talk. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, actually, because he was, because I have his slides. Well, the slide I think is the same, but I have his slides from NG Atlanta, which was like 2 weeks ago. And there, I mean, there's so much. So I know the CDK. I'm really excited about the CDK because it's got some really cool functionality. And there are some things that I was trying to do, kind of advanced. I'm trying to get a table to use the CDK table and virtual scroll at the same time, which I did get it working. But the thing is, the whole material team is working on Ivy. And then there's a lot going on with Basil. You guys know about co-design?
Tell us about it.
Co-design is, but I don't think that's up there. I don't think there's I don't know if there's an icon for it yet.
What is it?
Co-design?
Tell us about it.
Let me see if well, okay, it's not my slide, it's Brad Green's slide, but let me see if I can share this. Let me put it over here. Share this with you. And put this up here. This down here. Can I share my screen for a second?
Should be able to, yeah. Should just work.
Which one is it? Can you see this?
It's on its way. Yeah.
You see the pink and the blue moving?
Yep.
So basically, this is like, I'm trying to see if I can present this interview. Let me see.
See if I can do anything here.
Sorry, okay, that did not help. Where'd it go? Okay, so basically, it's like Sketch, right? This is the Google Cloud Platform thing that they've been working on for a while. It's a living design spec, and it's got an interactive GUI. And then teams can share this, and basically you just click around and you pick out all your different elements, and you can store them in there and share them and pass them around, and it just shows you. Can you see the GIF okay with the switching from pink to blue?
Yeah, so what we're looking at, if you can't see it in the back, it's showing a couple of different swatches that'll let you pick between your primary and accent colors and an Angular material theme. Does it have anything other than the colors, or does it support things like your border radius and stuff like that?
Does it support things like what?
Like border radius?
Oh, yeah. Over on the right, it's got size, it's got background, images, padding, layout, main axis cross. I mean, it's got all these different CSS parameters in a GUI, right? So you're going to click around, and this is nice because it's not just your developers. You can actually pass this back and forth with your design team, get everybody on the same page using this tool, which is beautiful. I think they're already starting to use it. The Google Cloud Platform has been working on this, but this is something that there is actually, if you go to the Angular blog, there is an article about this, and I can tweet this article after we're done here, and you guys can retweet it if you want.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. Anyone else got
Yeah, it's very
anything?
cool.
Or I think Bonnie wins on that question. She's got interactive demo and everything. Anything else you see coming
Well,
for
it wasn't
integration?
it wasn't my slide. It was Brad's slide. I just stole it from Brad's presentation. But he did a whole talk about that, and that was part of the talk. I don't know if he talked about that at Angular Mix, but I don't think that the NG Atlanta video is up yet. Otherwise, I would have just linked you guys to it.
I got a couple words on your previous
Sure.
slide you had up, though. So, yeah, that's a really impressive slide, and we found out that it's already obsolete. There's already like at least 2 more icons that should be on there. I feel like the competition, to the extent there is one, it's a very friendly competition among all the things like Angular, is in the process of elevating away from like who has a slightly different syntax for making a component and toward like what platform brings the most amazing gigantic array of out-of-the-box capabilities. And so Angular's looking real strong there. I know that Vue, there's a whole bunch of stuff around Vue. There's quite a bit around React. It's been building up a while, but I think companies just now entering this space won't be comparing like component building tool to component building tool. They'll be comparing like ecosystem of supported tools to ecosystem of supported tools. So it's getting to be a very high stakes, big investment space to be in.
Can I speak to that? And actually, it's just like you said, because I was talking to, Manfred Stair just made that, what was that NPM package, NGX Build Plus, which is like an extension. It's like adds some functionality to the Angular CLI without having to eject. And it's a really great little NPM package. And I was talking to him a couple weeks ago in Atlanta, and he said he actually looked at Vue because Vue had this functionality that he really liked and Angular didn't. And so he went and looked at the Vue source code and ported it over into Angular. And I've heard the same thing about, people are looking at React or there's some other thing that does some cool thing. Let's go figure out how to make Angular do that. And they're not, and there's no shame in it, right? It's like, hey, this is cool. And I would use something that Kyle wrote and say like, hey, Kyle wrote this really cool thing and I'm going to use it and I'm going to, give him a shout out and let people know. But there's no shame in that. I mean, we all share and collaborate. That's one of the things I love about the Angular community, and it's a great thing for everybody moving forward. Which also Basil, right? Basil